I was in a conversation just the other day with a person who had never ventured into the wilderness of the North. So, trying to relate Northern pagan concepts to people who have never experienced the wilderness, the vast, beautiful wilderness, the nature, the elemental changes, the cycles of the seasons, trying to relate this to people who have never been there is a task in and of itself. And it brought into a conversation that I was having with a person the word that I used to use all the time, and I had gotten away from it, and I'm going to get back to it, is presentism. Presentism is taking a modern mindset and saying what I now have is thrust upon their ways and their beliefs, because saying it's present with me now where I live, then I'm going to make it part of who they were. And that is very, very wrong to do. Our lore, our poetic Edda, our Northern paganism, our ancestors from the North had Northern nature. The lore is filled with stories that imbue the essence, the spirit of Northern nature. Ullr. I've heard many people talk about Ullr, God Ullr, in our books, and we start right off with, in our poetry book, both of them. We discuss Ullr because unless you grew up in those mountains, this was the view, okay, that my wife experienced, had the joy and the privilege of seeing on a daily basis. I'm going to try to do this in reverse. This here mountain right here is Nipple Top. Then you have back here Macomb. This is Hunter's Pass. This is Dix. Over here you have Haystack. You have Mount Marcy. This right here is Elk Lake. She had Boris Mountain visible out from her driveway. She had the Boris River that flowed through her backyard. These things, it's not taking a weekend trip into the mountains that's going to suddenly imbue you with the ways and beliefs of our Northern ancestry. There's no secret rites of passage. I've heard that being said by modern people who call themselves teachers and instructors of our ancient lore. There's no secrecy to it. The secrecy is the mountains, the nature, that Northern pagan essence that flows through your body. And it flows through, because of blood memory, it flows through every person who has Northern heritage, pagan Northern heritage, because there's a blood memory that has been, well, the religious cults of Abraham tried to scrub that blood memory. But I was talking to this person about Ullr and the groves, the Holy Land of the North. In our Poetic Edda, it says that the yew tree is the world tree, and it's a holy tree. Well, where does that yew tree grow? It grows in the north, and it grows in abundance in the groves. As you proceed or ascend up a mountain, a high peaks mountain, you're going to go through the deciduous trees, and then you're going to run into rows of birch trees, because the higher elevations, some of those deciduous trees don't survive. The birch does. Then intermingled with the birch trees, the higher you climb, you're going to run into these groves of yew trees. Okay, pretty soon your birch trees are going to start becoming more scarce, and then you're going to have a band around that mountain. It's called your timberline. Okay, and those are yew dales. Above that you have the rocky rest beds, the dens. Every High Peaks mountain has this. Every High Peaks mountain has this. The world has this. The globe, the round globe that we have as Earth has this. It is called the boreal forest. That boreal forest, as we've explained in our writings, is Freya's necklace. It is Freya's belt. It is the holy lands of the north. Why are they holy, though? Why did our northern pagan ancestors... Now, let me be clear on this before I go any further. It was not a religion. Religions were created to subjugate, control, and enslave, to take money from people, to abuse them spiritually, mentally, physically. Our ancient ways were about family, folk, and frith. They taught strength, they taught honor, they taught cycles, they taught a oneness with nature and your surrounding, a respect for the ecosystem, not a destruction of it. That is what Northern Paganism is. So, Ullr and these Ýdalir, why were they holy? Who is Ullr really? Well, growing up in these mountains, which I grew up in them as well, I didn't have as many of those awesome, picturesque views as my wife did until I met her, unless I hiked to them. But I was in and amongst a small community in those mountains, and they were readily available, walking distance available. And I have walked through many of those groves, and they do give a holy experience, a sacred experience. And I'll explain that. Ullr first. Ullr in our lore, in the Poetic Edda, is Howler. Now, unless you've been up in the mountains at night during the summertime, when it's breeding season especially, for our bear, you won't know what this Howler is. But you have time. Research it. Do an internet search and you'll find it. It'll come up. And they have little audio clips now of what the bear sounds like when it howls. So you see there's 3 that howl in the northern forest. And someone who's never heard a bear howl will be confused by it. They may think it's an owl late at night, or maybe even a wolf with a partial howl. But there's 3 that howl. The owl, the wolf, and our bear. So Ullr is the howler. And that's why Ullr, or God Ullr, his home is Ýdalir. Now, knowing the high peaks, why is the home Ýdalir? Because when a bear makes its den, that's where it goes. It goes high up into that timberline. It finds dugouts and trees, or it finds a den among the rocky rest beds, and that is where it makes its den. That's where its home is. That's where it sleeps. In the cosmos, we see this. When it is mating season for our bear in the summertime, that means the cosmic bear is all the way as far north as it can get, as far high into the viewing area of the person who's standing there looking at the heavens can see. It's way up there on the northern horizon. Okay, so it's depicted that cosmic bear is in its den, and that coincides with breeding season in nature. So these groves, and once you understand how these groves were seen by our northern pagan ancestors, then you'll also see where the carving of pumpkins comes from, and where the tree placed in every home during Yule season comes from. When you enter a grove, imagine, if you will, you walk into this canopy of evergreens, and above you, it's like a shield above your head. It's a thick, overlapping canopy of evergreen branches. If the wind is blowing, it is drastically diminished where you are inside that grove. Drastically diminished. You can hear it blowing above your head, but for you it may be a light breeze, if anything at all. If it's snowing, the branches catch that snow as it's coming down, or sleet or hail or whatever. They catch that snow. They build up even a thicker barrier above you, so it's drastically reduced where you are. If it's raining, the condition is almost surreal, because not only do they catch the brunt of the downward water, they then allow it to drip from their pine needles, branches, and it becomes surreal, very serene, very quiet, very peaceful. On the ground, you're walking on this cottony bed of yellow that have died and fallen from the branches of the pine tree, the yew tree, and it becomes soft, like you're walking on cotton, but it's all yellow, like gold. Maybe that's where the Abrahamic text took their walking on streets of gold from. It is quiet, peaceful. If you don't step on any branches or anything, you will walk through those groves completely undetected. During storming seasons, the deer will go in there in these groves to make their beds. And I've come across many of these beds on my trips through the groves. They make their beds because they're protected. They're protected from the elements and the winds. So you have all of these going on. Now, to our northern pagan ancestors, these were groves of the goddess, groves of Mother Goddess. They would go into these groves to seek her blessing for an increase of family. Okay? But why would they go into these groves? They would go into these groves because when an ancestor would die, that's where some of our northern pagan ancestors, especially the Celts, ancient Celtic belief system was to bury the deceased in a yew grove, in a yew dale, plant a sapling yew tree over the area where you buried your ancestor. If they were husband and wife, they were planted side by side, and then the branches would intertwine together because the yew tree never dies. Just like the spirit never dies. Our folk soul is eternal. So, but then during fall, when after harvest and food sources are running out and they had to start hunting, okay, our bear in nature was a spirit animal. It was a being of veneration. The courage, the honor, the cycles of the bear were followed. That's where my stone, the midsummer celebration, comes from, is because it's a honoring of that mating season of the bear, which would then give birth during that moon cycle of Imbolc, but remain in his den, and then closer towards spring, closer toward Ostri, the bear would emerge from his den with its cubs. So that bear was seen as an animal of veneration, but it was also seen to sacrifice its life so that its folk could live. Now, that bear was seen as kin, as an ancestor, as grandmother, grandfather were some of the names for it. There was many names for it. So after the hunt, they'd bring that bear back. There'd be almost like a celebration that this grandfather sacrificed its life. And this is where the whole bogus idea of cannibalism comes from. That's all Abrahamic misinterpretation and misapplication. The grandfather, the grandmother that were being eaten was the bear. And there was a reverence, there was a thankfulness for that bear sacrificing its life. There was an honor that bear was treated with, unlike today's meat markets. The skull, which represents the memory, and the leg bones, which represent life, animation. That's where we get the word spirit from, anima, animation. The legs provide the movement. The skull was painted up. Now you're getting into where the pumpkins come from. The skull was painted up. Now remember, it's Samhain through Yule through Fimbulwinter, the 3 long months of winter. And I say months, it's lunar cycles. They'd paint that skull up, and they'd put the crossed leg bones in with it, and they would wrap it. Now, if they needed the fur, they would keep the fur, and they would use a decorative linen. If they didn't need the fur, then they would wrap the bear in its own fur. They would carry it back into the forest, into those yew dales where they had taken it. and they would hang it on a young sapling tree, a young sapling yew tree. Now, many times these young sapling yew trees were the ones that were planted over their ancestor who they had just buried. So they're hanging this symbol of valiancy, of courage, of honor, of strength that they followed the cycles of on the tree that was planted over their ancestor. Now, these yew groves were entered, these sacred places that I just described were entered to conceive children and seek the blessing of increase from Mother Goddess. They're looking for the rebirth of that valiant ancestor into their young. They're asking Mother Goddess to give them that ancestor, that valiancy, back in another cycle. Rebirth of our valiant ancestors from our folk soul. So this was totally modified by Ibn Fadlan, a Muslim, who wrote that, again, a total corruption of what was actually taking place, that the Norsemen would enter into sexual relations in front of their family members. Yeah, okay. Going into a grove of the goddess to seek increase where your ancestors are buried is not having sex in front of them. And that is let's just be honest, that is the stupidity that these religious cults of Abraham have created in modernity. Now, those aspects of the grove and the femininity of them, the seeking of Mother Goddess, now you understand why in the Bible, in those texts of Abraham that were written by men who wanted to overthrow that northern pagan cycle, that wanted to upset the matriarchal societies that were northern pagan and subjugate them and make them subservient while taking their land and their money and their belongings, breaking up the family unit. Now you know why they wrote into their texts to destroy the groves in high places, to destroy everything about them and kill all the people that were going into them. It's in their texts and it's in there repeatedly. Presentism is taking the Ýdalir, which are called the holy groves, and making them something completely different. Presentism is not knowing that the bear howls and making Ullr something entirely different with secret rites of passage. And what we're doing in our writings, our northern pagan writings, is correcting that imbalance. We are giving you back from a spirit of the north and a spirit of northern nature and northern paganism, translated with that spirit flowing through the poetic Edda, flowing through our lore, discounting what Abraham has made it to be, and giving that back to you so that you can understand what your ancestors believed and what they taught their young, which resulted in you, and that blood courses through your veins. That's what we give you in our writings. To not understand that it all originates from places like this is to not understand the belief system, the traditions, the culture, and the ways of your northern pagan ancestors.